Shifting trends in Orca captivity. This was actually just going to be about a 5-minute news update about some of the really amazing and dynamic events of just the past couple of years that has completely changed the landscape in terms of those of us who would prefer not to see orcas doing tricks in captivity and the industry that is supported by them doing tricks in captivity. It's just shifted dramatically, just very recently. But then, I began to look at it, and to really appreciate that, it's much better to get a whole overview, a long view of kind of the history that has led up to that, to see just how momentous these recent events are. So, that's what we're going to see here. This is from the Miami Seaquarium, roughly in the mid-70s. Couldn't get an exact date on that, but please note the circular nature of the tank there. It has since then gotten a little flanged. It goes back 12 feet, and it's about 12 feet deep on the back. It's been kind of redesigned, but that's how it started up. That's how she lived there the first about 10 years. But before we go further, I'd like to say a word about a word. And that is park. I've always called them, those places where the orcas do tricks in circular pools, a marine park. That's what everybody calls them. That's what's in the media. That's what they call themselves. So that's what I've always called them. But a couple of months ago, a friend brought it to my attention that they're not really parks. A park is an open place where you go to have a picnic, throw a frisbee, and maybe see some animals, running around doing their thing. But that's not what this is. It's actually in a circular place. And if you look at the history of it, which was done in this book, The Rose-Tinted Menagerie, you can see that the historical origins of what we see today at what they call the marine parks was the Roman circus. Circus for circle because it took place in a circle with a stadium with all the spectators watching the spectacle. And what they did was they went to North Africa, rounded up all the big mammals, and put them in the ring and slaughtered them along with whatever was the underclass at the time, Christians or whoever it was, the gladiators who would kill and be killed. And that was really the origin. And that morphed into the Barnum and Bailey with the dancing geese and the singing donkeys. But it really is all one long historical thread. And you can see over there the dolphin diving through the hoop to show that that's a part of that tradition. So I just want to clear that up, that it's really more of a circus than a park. So now, bringing it up to more contemporary times, it really started, this orca captivity business, in 1964, when a whale, actually a juvenile male from J-Pod, was harpooned from Saturna Island and dragged over to Vancouver as a model for a sculpture. They thought it was a female, it was a male, who lived only 3 months. But in that time, even though mortally wounded, he showed that they're not that vicious. They're not the killer whales that will rip you to shreds if they get a chance. And that, excuse me, I need some water. That completely changed, apparently, from the Times of London, changed the whole image of the killer whale almost overnight. But it also caught the notice of an entrepreneur in Seattle, Ted Griffin, who got a hold of a whale that was captured up in Namu, British Columbia. And so he went up and brought it down to Seattle, and put Namu on display, and made a lot of money, made Namu into a worldwide celebrity, movies, cover stories, all kinds of stuff about Namu. And that completely, for the world, changed the attitude toward killer whales. I mean, give them credit where it's due. That, it took that. They should have known. We all should have known before that. But that removed that whole image of them being so vicious and made them into pretty smart and cooperative and easy to train. But that also made them hot commodities at the box office. And that started the roundups. And within a year, the first Shamu was captured as a companion for Namu and then shipped down to San Diego because she didn't get along with Namu. Was the first killer whale on display at the new startup aquarium called SeaWorld in San Diego. So look at the size of that circular tank. That's where she spent, I don't know how many years, but she only lived 7 years. And then there were more Shamus to come after that, as you know. So now I want to introduce you to a pivotal figure, Dr. Ken Norris, who is generally and very fondly known as the father of cetology. And really, directly or indirectly, he was the mentor and the father figure for every cetologist out there. We all owe a lot to Ken Norris. He discovered echolocation in dolphins, or proved it. And he just did a whole lot of great stuff. He started the first biennial conference on cetology. He started the society. He was the first president of the Society of Marine Mammalogy. And he also started several marine parks and was one of SeaWorld's original owners. So what that did is it gave SeaWorld complete invincibility from any criticism, certainly from any scientific person. You could not criticize SeaWorld and Captivity, or you were criticizing Father Ken Norris. You couldn't do that. He was a great guy in a lot of ways. And that gave SeaWorld this aura of complete authority. There was just no scientist anywhere who could contradict the SeaWorld scientists. So they had it. They had a lot on credibility. And for a long time, they were cetology. It was completely intermixed with SeaWorld, certainly in the beginning. So that is sort of the image that SeaWorld has continued with to this day, even though they've long outlived the reality of that. So within a couple of years, by 1990, there were orcas in captivity in all of these places. The ones in bold are the ones where there are still orcas in captivity. All over the place, private home in Japan, for instance. I mean, just all over. They were just such hot commodities. People made a lot of money all over the world. And to date, as of now, 156 have died in captivity. So that sort of gives you a sense of the breadth and scope of the industry. So, look forward to 1976, right here, where the captures finally ended. And I'll be telling you about a book that is in production right now to describe that whole 10-year period of captures in these waters. I'll tell you a little more about that later. But it was mainly by the efforts of Secretary of State Ralph Monroe to end the captures. He wasn't Secretary of State then, he was an assistant to the governor, Governor Evans. But he managed to basically, with a whole lot of help from a lot of people, a lot of journalists and a lot of other people, to stop the captures. This is relevant. One of our annual August 8th Orca capture commemorations right here in Penn Cove, where it took place. And that's sort of a typical quote from Ralph. People are sick and tired of these Southern California amusement parks taking our wildlife down there to die. And on and on. He was a very blunt speaker. Still is. So also in 1976, Ken Balcom got a contract to count the whales. It was due to the captures because nobody knew how many there were and if that population was being depleted, so it was very important to get a count. But Ken didn't have really any interest in the whole captivity issue. His interest was, like it says there, to do a scientific study, purely scientific, and to get information on the natural history, social behavior, and population dynamics of these animals. And he was just a cut-and-dry data-gathering field researcher. He would report his studies, but he wasn't doing it for any cause except science, good, pure science. And in 1980, a couple years later, I joined with Orca Survey as a complete neophyte. I didn't know whales from hippopotami, but I learned fast and got completely engrossed in the topic. But I was, along with Ken, just a researcher. I was just fascinated by the science of studying these whales. So that was our complete focus, even though there were whales from that population in captivity. And by 1987, there was only one, Lolita, in captivity, but we really didn't pay that any mind at that time. We were involved in just doing the field research. So this is the first of a series of slides just to let you know about the changing ownership of SeaWorld. Ken Norris got out in 1976 when Harcourt Grace Jovanovich bought the parks and expanded them and did all kinds of things. And then it became a marketing machine at that point. Still taking full advantage of that immunity from any criticism and that aura of ultimate authority, but marketing and just shaping our image of not only the experience at SeaWorld, but of the whales themselves. From sort of cuddly teddy whales to, first they were vicious whales, but our expert trainers could train them to do anything. They made up the image of, that's okay. It's not a power failure. Good idea, Sandy. Is that better? Good. So anyway, it changed hands in 1976. And then in 1989, it changed hands again. And this time it was bought by Budweiser, Anheuser-Busch here, along with a couple of other amusement parks, theme parks. And it became even more of a marketing machine. We all know how good Budweiser is at selling their beer. Well, they applied all of those methods and those, who knows how many, office buildings full of PR professionals to marketing SeaWorld. So they really built it up. And between 1976 and 89, even though captures ended here, they started up within a month off of Iceland, and another 77 were captured between 76 and 89, mostly in Iceland, but also Japan, Argentina, a few other places. So the industry went on. There was no let-up, even though there were protesters. There were a few people here and there who put up a sign, wrote a letter, tried to do something about it, but there was absolutely no match for the publicity machine of first Harcourt Grace and then Budweiser. You can't match those people in terms of influencing the public, the whole public consciousness and opinion. And then there was this incident right across the way here in Victoria, where 3 whales, one of them being Tillicum, killed a trainer. And it wasn't just playing around. They dragged her in, dragged her down, and wouldn't let her out, and mangled her pretty bad. So that was quite a shock. But it was such an anomaly. It was in Canada, so it was So not very many people heard about it outside the industry, and the ones inside didn't really want to do anything about it. So within a year, Silicon got ships down to Orlando, SeaWorld, and we will hear more about that, of course. And then, fast forward, years go by, and the industry just keeps growing and growing and growing, even though they're killing whales rapidly. And they're all dying in their youth because they were all captured young, of course. So June 1993, Free Willy, the movie, is released, and that gave great hope to a lot of people. Here's a movie about releasing orca that's being abused in captivity. What could be better than that? Little side note on that, this was not the intention at all. The producers wanted to make a movie about whaling, but they couldn't find a really engaging plot about a beekeeper. So the only story they could find was about an orca. And so they made that movie, and then they had the 800 number at the end where you're supposed to call in to register your complaint about whaling. But almost all the calls, and there were hundreds of thousands of them, were about, what are we going to do about Willie? How are we going to get him out of there? So that generated a huge response to try to do something to get the actual movie star whale out of that little tiny tank. So on September 1st, Ken actually went to Mexico City and got the job, much to his amazement, to release Keiko. A phased, very carefully done release back to his native waters off Iceland. And the same day, the industry intervened and said, no. Don't listen to that fuzzy-faced biologist. We'll take care of that whale. And they used various methods to negate the deal, which was recorded. It was a promise. They were not going to negotiate with anybody for 6 months while Ken devised his plan. But he had already been working on it because he had been requested in June or maybe May of that year to do something to help Keiko. So he already had a pretty good plan in mind. And then there was a Life magazine story which generated global response, a huge amount, and the story was all about Ken's plan. Even though the industry had already intervened, and in Mexico City, the park didn't want to do anything with Ken at that point. But Greg McCaw had a $2.5 million check written out to Ken to do something for Keiko. But it wasn't until June of 1994 that Ken officially and totally and completely lost that opportunity, and of course the check and everything else to do with it. Ken wanted to start a field study of Icelandic orcas with the unlimited funds from McCaw. He could have done that. And that way Keiko might have reunited with his actual family, if that had been allowed. But that was stopped. So Ken lost the job. But about that time, and because of the movie, Naomi Rose was hired at the Humane Society of the U.S. To start their campaign against captivity. So she did everything she could, like compiling these statistics. 18% of the wild population around here died between 73 and 92, whereas 48% of the captive population died. That should end the story. The experiment fails. It doesn't work. You cannot keep them captive. They just won't live. And of course, of those 48%, they were all young. And this is something, the Internet's a wonderful thing, and this is a bar chart that shows that most of them, by far, died before the age of 15. That should tell you a lot, but it's still no match for the marketing power of the industry. Okay, one question. We're going to have most of them for last, but if there's something right now, yes. How long does a whale live is the question. Well, the average, females can live average about 50, and 90 or 100 is entirely possible. Males, a little over half that, average about 30, and J1 Ruffles was photographically documented to be 60 years old when he died last year, so a lot longer than 50. 1994, this was a gadfly meeting. Gadfly was kind of what it sounds like, a bunch of ragtag activists from all over the place. We were funded by the Animal Welfare Institute to have meetings and do these protests. Here we were at Marine World, Africa, Vallejo, California. That's us standing up in the front row, holding hands in silent witness to the tragedy of captivity. And Yaka there is looking at us very closely. So, you know, that's kind of ineffective. All we can do. We don't have the money behind us. We don't have the ability to really make a whole lot of waves. But, you know, I mean, that plants some seeds, it turns some heads. So that was really all we could do. There were meetings in Ontario, Canada, and several other places where there are services. And then in 1994, the Seattle Times Magazine ran a cover story about hens turning his attention from Keiko to Lolita. Let's get Lolita out of there. So this is a big, long, feature-length story. It went very well, and it sort of put Ken on the map as working now for Lolita. He realized in that almost a year, really, that he was working on the Keiko project before it got pulled out from under him. He learned a lot, and he applied the science. And it was still based on science, not only the sort of the solution to it, but what he, you know, to being able to do it. He by looking at all the precedents, he could see that it could be done. You could release a long-term captive orca in a gradual program back into the ocean. But also the benefits to science of studying what happens. That's what he wanted to see. He wanted to unlock the mysteries of the oceans, to see what's in their minds, to see the ability to recognize and remember and rejoin if possible, to see if it's possible or not. I mean, it would be an experiment, admittedly, and it would reveal a lot to just see how it could be done. That's how he was approaching it. And so in March of 95, Kent, Ralph Monroe, and Governor Mike Lowry launched the Lolita campaign. They had the press conference with all the networks and the radio and print media and the charts and graphs, and they made a big to-do of it and announced we are starting the Lolita campaign. And the next day they all went back to their jobs, and there was no Lolita campaign, actually. So I raised my hand, well, I'll do a Lolita campaign. That sounds like fun. So I started a nonprofit organization called the Tokite Foundation, which was the original name given to Lolita when she was purchased from Andy Cove, and started, you know, a very small nonprofit organization just to try to do this campaign that had been started. I thought that seemed like a worthy cause to devote myself to. And we did want to start with a communications experiment from Miami to San Juan Island using Craig McCaw's satellites. He was a cell phone magnate, by the way, so he owned satellites and would probably love to see them used this way. It never happened, of course. They refused in Miami to allow it to happen. They said it would not be interesting. I think it would. So that was the origins of the Lolita campaign right there. So a lot of these are just sort of events that happened. That, you know, it might be hard to see the direct threads and connections, but they're all kind of feeding into the public consciousness and changing minds a little at a time. And this was actually a very big event. 1995, two NOAA scientists went through all the statistics, which are really pretty hard to do, to compare captivity with the wild in terms of mortalities and everything else. But they came up with the conclusion that survival of the wild population was significantly higher than the captive population, which means mortalities were significantly higher in captivity. So that should have ended the story right there. That pretty well proved it. But, of course, it can be ignored And then in November of '95, Eric Hoyt, Naomi Rose, and I did a little prank at the biennial conference hosted by Orlando SeaWorld. Having fun with PageMaker, I put together this faux scientific paper called Observations of Disparity Between the Educational Material Related to Killer Whales Disseminated by the Public Display Institutions and the Actual Scientific Literature. And cited all kinds of sources and references. And so, and we printed up a couple of hundred of those and went around the biennial conference in elevators and hallways and just passed them out to everybody we could, which was a lot of fun. You know, did anybody come up and say, I really changed my mind from that? No. But you never know, who might have read it, taken it home, and, had a little bit of a change of heart or opened up their minds a little bit from it. And then in 1996, Keiko went to Oregon. Craig McCaw, who was still doing the project, just with Earth Island Institute, Warner Brothers, and the Humane Society, but hiring staff, because that's the only place you could find them, was from the industry, and so he was persuaded that Keiko needed a $12 million tank as a halfway house, so he built one in Oregon. And that year also, Como TV came out with an hour-long documentary called Lolita, Spirit in the Water, which was beautiful, really well done. Kathy Gertson narrated it, and